Hi, welcome back. This is True Crime with Dee. I'm Dee. You can also call me Diana. And today we're talking about another true crime story. I got a suggestion from a few of you who tune into my true crime content, and I got recommended to put my makeup on while I'm telling the story. And I love that idea because the one and only goddess herself, Bailey Sarian, does that on her channel. And honestly, I've always wanted to do that, but I didn't want people to be like, you're just trying to copy Bailey. It's never gonna happen. But I'm down to try this. So if you prefer this method of true crime while I'm getting ready and telling you the story, then let me know if you like that and I'll keep it. So today we're gonna be talking about the Happy Face Killer. And this is where I would like to give you a warning. We will be discussing mature content in today's video. So if that type of stuff just isn't for you, now would be the time to click off. Okay, let's get started. My one candle. Keith Hunter Jesperson was born on April 6th, 1955 in Chilliwack, British Columbia, to his father Les and his mother Gladys. Keith was actually the middle child and he had two brothers and two sisters. Though he would deny it, Les was actually an alcoholic, so this resulted in him being really abusive, especially to Keith in particular. So at a very young age, Keith was kind of alienated by his own family. They all picked on him a lot, and this was mainly because of his size. He was just like a big kid, super tall. I guess husky would be the correct word. His brothers and sisters called him Igor as a nickname, but also to tease him because of his large size. And when he finally started going to school, this whole pattern of bullying from other kids also continued to happen to him. So at a really young age, he just got into it with his dad all the time, and Les didn't really hold back. He got very violent with him often, and he would just beat him up all the time. And there was also a point in time when he even tasered him. So being bullied by his own family and from other random people at school, it definitely took a toll on him, and eventually he just got fed up with it. He was really lonely and angry. So in British Columbia, he already had a hard time going to school, growing up, and when he was still a little kid, his family decided to pack up and move from Canada to a town called Selah, Washington. So they all made the big trip from Canada to the United States, and this made Keith even more lonely and angry because he really struggled at finding friends. So at the tender age of 5 years old, actually began to capture stray animals that he found and torture and kill them. Major red flag. He would later report that this fascination with capturing animals, torturing them, making them fight against each other, it really sparked his joy. And it also made him very curious as to how or what it would be like to kill a human. So he, is pretty much textbook serial killer. Usually that's one of the biggest traits, is that they are into harming animals, killing animals, and having fun doing that. So Keith was no exception to that. He also mentioned that when he was 10 years old, he actually attempted his first murder against a former classmate named Martin. Keith says that him and Martin were friends enough, acquaintances, they were in the same class. He said that Martin would do things around class, get in trouble, but then blame it on Keith and say, no, it wasn't me, it was Keith. So Keith always ended up getting in trouble, and this made him very angry. So he decided one day that he was just gonna kill him. So essentially, one day Keith snapped. He wanted to end his life. So basically what happened is he just got in a fight with Martin and he started punching him as hard as he could. He had no intention of stopping whatsoever. And he basically got him on the ground and was punching him. But luckily, Keith's father had been there and he broke up the fight. So Martin did not die, thankfully. But that was the first time that he actually knew that he wanted to kill people, and that was his goal. So only a year after his fight with Martin, he tried again to kill someone else. He had been swimming at a lake and another boy that was there was messing around with him, and he ended up holding Keith's head underwater, giving him a hard time. And this stayed with Keith, and he was just so angry about it So later on, another day, they were actually at a community swimming pool together, and he saw the boy and he was like, this is it. My moment is here. So he tried to hold this boy's head underwater as long as he could in attempts to drown him. But his plan ended up falling through because a lifeguard caught Keith holding the other kid's head underwater. So he helped the boy out and Keith had to go home. So after those two incidents, he just kind of laid low, I guess. Those urges never went away, but he didn't act on them. And in 1973, he graduated high school, and he said he did not want to go to college because his father basically told him that he wasn't smart enough to go to college. So he was like, okay. And he found a job as a truck driver to make a living for himself. So as I mentioned, he always felt kind of lonely, like an outcast, didn't really fit in. So he didn't date much in high school at all. 2 years after graduating, he actually married a woman named Rose. So he and Rose ended up having 3 children together. They had 2 daughters and 1 son. So things appeared to be honestly going great for Keith. He found a job where he was making steady money. He had a wife, he popped out a few kids. Things seemed to be going fine. Obviously, with his job as a truck driver, he was out on the road a lot. So that left Rose to be at home with the kids, and that was pretty much it. So years into the relationship, Rose began to suspect that Keith was maybe seeing other women behind her back, having multiple affairs, because she mentioned that at their home, they would always get really, really strange phone calls from random women all the time. So one of the days that Keith had been out on the road for work, she packed everything up, took the kids, and drove 200 miles away to stay with her parents in Spokane, Washington. So Rose didn't really want anything to do with him, but Keith managed to continue having contact with his kids, and anytime he would pass through town or he had a stop or a few days off, whatever it was, he would go and see his kids. And eventually they divorced in 1990. So after the divorce, Keith was like, well, I am now alone. I have all this time to myself. Let me get back to some of my goals. He had always wanted to become a Royal Canadian Mounted Policeman. And he was like, you know what? I have all this time now. I don't have a wife anymore. I don't really see my kids as often. So let's make my dreams come true. So he began training for that. He was 35 years old, 6 foot 7 inches, and he weighed about 240 pounds. So he began the training, like I said, but he ended up getting an injury, which he couldn't bounce back from, I guess. So his dreams of joining the Canadian Police Force were cut short. This kind of sent him into a spiral, and you guessed it, this is when the killing began. So he started working as an interstate truck driver again, and he relocated to the town of Cheney, Washington. And this, unfortunately, is when his killing spree began. So Keith kind of knew that his job as a truck driver would be kind of easy for him to kill people and go, because they were always on the road. He was just a random guy by himself. He tended to prey on people who were kind of in vulnerable situations, I guess you could say, so that way it was harder to pin the crime on him. On January 23rd, 1990, Keith happened to be in Portland, Oregon at the time, and he went out that night to a local bar and he met a woman named Tanya Bennett. So he meets her and he invites her back to the place that he had been renting at the time. I guess he had been expecting them to have intercourse that night, and she didn't want to do that. It turns out they kind of got into it at the place he was renting. He was pressuring her to have sex with him and she didn't want to, so she tried to fight back. And sadly, this resulted in him beating her several times and then strangling her to death. Now, if you remember, Keith is a huge guy, so it's quite likely that he inflicted quite a lot of pain on her just due to his large stature. So after he killed her, he left her body in the house that he had been renting, went back to the bar and had a few more drinks, and he just got into conversation with people. He was basically trying to make an alibi for himself, saying, no, I was here at the bar all night. But he stayed out at the bar, went back home, disposed of her body, hid her purse somewhere, and then he was back on the road. A few days later, her body was found, but sadly police had no leads on who had killed her. Nobody was connected to her. And so a local woman who had just been watching TV and she heard about Tanya's story, her name was Laverne. At the time, Laverne was in a very abusive relationship and she was trying to get out in any way she could. So she actually devised a plan to tell the police that she helped her abusive boyfriend named John capture Tanya, rape her, and kill her just so she could actually get away from him in real life. She didn't know Tanya, she wasn't connected to the crime at all, but she just saw this as an opportunity to get out of the relationship she was in. And police believed her. So Laverne and John were convicted of killing Tanya, and in February 1991, they were actually sentenced. So John actually got a longer sentence. He was sentenced to life in prison, and Laverne was given a little bit less than 10 years in prison. So after the verdict was given, I guess she didn't really realize that they would be getting that much time away. So she tried to tell people that she had made it all up, but they didn't believe her or listen to her. And the news of Tanya's death and how her murderers were captured eventually broke out on the media. So Keith found out about it, and this made him so mad because somebody else was taking credit for his work. So as a result of this, he wrote his confession on the bathroom stall at a random truck stop, and he went into detail about how he killed Tanya, and he signed it with a happy face. So that's how he got the name the Happy Face Killer. But this one confession in a random bathroom of a truck stop didn't really get the attention that he was looking for. So he eventually also started writing letters to media outlets, also signing the letter with a happy face. And that got a little more attention. So yeah, that's how he got the name the Happy Face Killer. Laverne and John actually ended up serving 4 years of prison time for the murder of Tanya that they didn't commit. Once police actually caught Keith, and he had told them that he was actually the one who had killed Tanya, and he had led police to where exactly he hid her purse, which Laverne and John had no idea of. So they were eventually let free. And I wonder what happened after the fact. Like, was she finally able to get away from John? I hope so. So Tanya was Keith's first victim. And in April of 1990, he was actually in Corning, California. And he says that he was approached by an intoxicated woman who had been holding a baby. And she said her name was Jean, and she needed a ride home. So she asked if he would be able to give her and her baby a ride home. So he was like, sure, no problem. So Jean put the baby kind of in the back, and at the beginning of the conversation, it was just normal conversation. And then Keith quickly turned things sexual. So he had asked her to orally please, and she did for a little bit, and then she stopped and asked him if he could just take her home. And obviously she probably got really uncomfortable because, you know, she just needed a ride. And Keith freaked out. He got really, really mad, made her finish, and then after he was done, he tried to break her neck and strangle her, but he was unsuccessful in that, and he didn't want to kill her baby. So what happened was he let her out. He let her and the baby out. He drove them back to where she approached him, and he left. So during the conversation they had in the car before things got sexual, I guess Keith was really honest and open with her, and he told her things about his personal life, like what his name was, and obviously she knew what he looked like, what kind of truck he drove. So she went to the police and told them everything that happened, and it wasn't that hard for police to track him down. So they found him and they arrested him, but he somehow was able to talk himself out of what Jean had told the police. Basically, his story was she was super intoxicated and I didn't try and hurt her, but she was down there and like space was so cramped, so maybe she thought I was trying to hurt her, but I really wasn't. Long story short, they like didn't arrest him or anything, but he still did receive a charge of sexual assault, which he had to show up in court for. He never showed up, and he just went back on the road and on his way. And so because he never showed up to the court date, California issued a felony warrant for his arrest if he was ever found. So like a week later at a weight check station in Iowa, he was stopped and he was arrested there. But he somehow lucked out again because the Iowa police determined that the warrant that California had put out wasn't strong enough, so the felony was dropped down to a misdemeanor. So they also decided that the cost of extraditing him back to California was not worth it. So he just had his charges dropped against him and he was free to go. So after all of this commotion with the police, Keith decided that he would lay low for a little bit. But on August 30th, 1992, he was back at it. The body of a woman who he had raped and strangled was found in Blythe, California. Police were unable to identify her, so she remained a Jane Doe until Keith had ultimately been caught and captured, and he just told police that he thought her name had been Claudia. 1 month later, the body of a woman named Cynthia Lynn Rose was found in Turlock, California. Keith had said that she had been a sex worker who decided to enter his truck one night and he just ended up strangling her to death. After the death of Cynthia, he had traveled to Salem, Oregon, where he had met a woman named Lori Ann Pentland. Keith claimed that she had also been a sex worker, and during their time together, she had doubled the fee of the service that she was providing him with, and she threatened to call the police if he did not pay. So his response to this was raping and strangling her to death. So after the brutal death of Lori, it only took Keith 6 months for him to strike again. In July 1993, another sex worker's body was found dead in Santanella, California. Keith said that he believes her name was either Carla or Cindy. The audacity of Keith really is too much for me to handle. Cops originally thought that she had died from a drug overdose, but when Keith was captured, he came clean about this crime. So basically this terrible pattern of driving around the US in his truck and meeting women, strangling and raping them was just his MO. And in September 1994, yet another strangled Jane Doe was found in Crestview, Florida. And Keith says that he thought her name was Suzanne. In January 1995, Keith agreed to take a woman that he had met named Angela Sabrise from Spokane, Washington, which is where he met her, to Indiana. So it was about halfway through the trip, and I guess Angela was getting really impatient with Keith's driving. Like, I guess he was just taking too long for her liking, I don't know. But she had told him that she was really in a rush to get to Indiana because that is where she was meeting up with her boyfriend. So after Angela had mentioned that she was anxious to see her boyfriend, this sent Keith into a tizzy. Don't know why, but he got absolutely furious. So he ended up beating her up and strangling her. But what makes it so much more terrifying is that he knew that people saw them together. So he got scared that someone, a witness, anyone would have recognized him with Angela. So after he strangled her, he strapped her body to the undercarriage of his truck and drove with her laying face down so that he could grind off her face and any fingerprints. That's just so scary. So sadly, Angela's body was found months and months after she was killed, and Keith just randomly dropped her off somewhere in Nebraska. So during this whole time, Keith had had a longtime girlfriend. So his girlfriend's name was Julie Ann Winningham. Only 2 months after brutally murdering Angela, he decided that his girlfriend Julie had only actually been with him for his money, so he wanted to kill her. So on March 10th, 1995, he went to Washougal, Washington, and sadly, he strangled his girlfriend Julie to death. So Julie had actually been the only victim of Keith's that had an actual link or connection to him, so it was only a matter of time before police connected the dots and realized that it was Julie's boyfriend, Keith, who had killed her. Police did investigate Keith. They questioned him about a week before they actually were able to arrest him. And Keith knew that the police would ultimately figure out it was him. So he tried to take his own life, not once, but twice, just to avoid the consequences for his actions. And after his attempts to end his own life didn't work out, he decided to turn himself into the police, and he hoped that by him turning himself in that maybe they would be a little lenient on him, but ultimately that was not the case. Keith wrote a letter to one of his brothers saying that he had killed 8 women in the past 5 years. So after his arrest, Keith came clean about all of the victims that we discussed today, but he also said that he had killed up to 160 women across the United States throughout his time as a truck driver. Police were never able to confirm this. The only murders that were confirmed were the 8 victims that we talked about today. So Keith is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences at the Oregon State Penitentiary. One of Keith's daughters, named Melissa Moore, has been very vocal about having a father as a serial killer. Keith essentially lived a double life. He had his family, he was married. Even though he didn't really want to be married, he still took fatherhood seriously. Melissa has actually been featured on shows like Dr. Phil, Oprah, and she's openly talked about that her father is a serial killer, all of the pain that's attached with that, and how she takes on a lot of the guilt from the crimes that her father committed. She also openly talks about knowing that her father was just different. Even at a really young age, she picked up on things that just she knew wasn't normal behavior. One of those things was that when they were all younger and they all lived in the same home together, her father would often pick up stray cats or stray gophers, and he would force them to fight each other and just get off on that. Like, he'd have so much joy just watching them suffer. She also says that he actually would take her pet kittens and hang them from their tails and like hit them. But as Melissa got older, she also says that her dad would say weird things to her, like, I know how to kill someone and get away with it. And she also said that he once told her that he cuts off the button of women's jeans so that when their bodies are found, cops can't find his fingerprints, and that he would wear cycling shoes when he was out dumping bodies because the shoes didn't have an imprint on the sole. So I guess Melissa just thought that maybe her dad was into investigating crimes and that's why he knew all of these weird things, but she never suspected that he was an actual serial killer. But she says that she wrote her book called Shattered Silence as an apology to all of the victims of her father, and she's just really sorry about all the pain that he has caused others. So that's the story of the happy face killer, Keith Jesperson. He knew that he could easily get away with these crimes because he was driving all over. And he knew that because all of his victims were so random and just across different states, it would be so hard to link him to all of these crimes. So it really makes me think, when he had said that he killed over 160 people, I really wonder how many people he actually killed, and police just don't know. I wonder if he did want to get caught though, because of the whole happy face letters situation. Because honestly, if he didn't kill his girlfriend, like, he had to know that he would be a suspect. So maybe he wanted to get caught. I hope you enjoyed this episode of True Crime with D. Thank you again for watching. I will see you in the next video. Love you so much. Bye.